Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Tracy Alexander, and coming up in today's newscast, what do they want? An insight into the different requests of settler leaders as Israel looks to expand across Judea and Samaria. To mask or not to mask, that is the question. An Israeli immunologist makes his case, and we'll tell you what biblical animal is looking for the right recognition. Well, with so many opposing opinions in Israel, there's a game people play called If You Could Be the Israeli Prime Minister. But at a time like this, I think it's difficult for anyone to finish the sentence around what to do regarding the rollout of the US Peaceful Prosperity Plan. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in a feverish diplomatic hustle ahead of his promised July 1 vote to unilaterally expand Israel's sovereignty over parts of Judea and Samaria. That's because the pushback over how or if it should be done is coming from every angle. Here's more. The heat is dialing up. Palestinian intelligence forces are reportedly being deployed in at least 2 West Bank cities, ordered to hide many of their files, as the Palestinian Authority prepares for possible violence if Israel moves to unilaterally expand its sovereignty over parts of Judea and Samaria. An eerie foreshadowing. Before the second Intifada outbreak in 2000, a similar step by the PA was taken.
Our immediate target is not to allow Israel to annex. This is our immediate target between today and July 1st. All our efforts are focused on this particular point.
This as Germany's foreign minister lands in Tel Aviv today, hammering home his country's unshakable commitment to Israel's security, but on the other hand, its vehement opposition to the intended unilateral expansion move.
Gemeinsam mit der Europäischen Union sind wir der Ansicht, dass eine Annexion nicht mit internationalem Recht vereinbar wäre und deshalb wir nach wie vor zu einer verhandelten, einvernehmlichen Zwei-Staaten-Lösung stehen.
A position Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh hopes will cause Israel to retreat.
What we hope is that really Israel should feel the heat of international pressure.
Signs of the sensitive security impact brewing further. The brief Israel visit by Heiko Maas will be followed by a visit to Jordan, an important partner for Israel in maintaining regional peace, where Defence Minister Benny Gantz is expected to make his first foreign visit as Defence Minister. Gantz, for his part, warning Israeli settler leaders against getting too greedy ahead of the July 1 vote. Meeting at the IDF headquarters in Judea and Samaria, Gantz is quoted as saying, "Take what's being offered to you. As for the rest, deal with it later." And what will be given? Well, top Israeli officials saying Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will initially announce annexation of 3 largely populated blocks, Ma'ale Adumim, Ariel and Gush Etzion, but not the Jordan Valley. Now, from either side of the aisle, there are different viewpoints, but even within each side, people don't seem to agree. And we're seeing this inside the settler communities in Judea and Samaria, who are all hoping for different outcomes. And to give us some insight into what those are, I'm joined by political strategist and Director of English Operations at the Yamina Party, Jeremy Sultan. Jeremy, a pleasure to have you with us. Now, we know that the Palestinian Authority has been rejecting this plan since the outset. Nothing new there. But now it's the settler leaders themselves who are taking issue with it. What can you tell us?
Well, you know, this plan has been in the works for over 3 years. Originally, it appeared that the Trump plan would not call for a Palestinian state, but this American plan does. Additionally, based on the conceptual maps, there are many concerns in regards to access roads that are lifelines to many Jewish settlements that would potentially be cut off. There are other issues, including the lack of coordination with mayors regarding to the implementation phase. And of course, as you just mentioned in the intro, we're not sure what will actually be included on July 1st, or in fact, if it will be on July 1st itself.
And we know that there's been meeting after meeting, of course, with both Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defence Minister Benny Gantz most recently. And there doesn't seem to be agreement even between the settlement heads as to, as you said, how to proceed. So what are we hearing in terms of the different standpoints internally?
Well, there are two different groups. What most agree on is obviously the opposition to the Palestinian state. However, what is key here in division between the two groups is the issue of trusting Netanyahu. It's a very complex plan. It's very difficult to explain. And what it comes down to in the end is trust. Those who don't trust the prime minister are opposing the plan.
And what are the concerns, of course, around the formation of the Palestinian state, both diplomatically, ideologically, and from a security standpoint?
Well, there are, many concerns that a lot of settled leaders have. I think one of the problems a lot of them are really going through here is that each one opposes it for a different reason. If you go ahead and you look at the settler leaders that support the plan, there's also no coherent underlining statement of which they're getting behind. That's why I said, to me, what it comes down to is trust. Because, again, this is an American plan, not an Israeli plan. So if they're going to get answers from the prime minister, they have to know that they can really believe what he is that he is telling them.
All right. So then to that, what do you say to those who say that the move should only be done with relevant parties like the Jordanians and the Palestinian Authority? What do you say to that?
Well, this, again, is an American plan. It's not an Israeli plan. The Americans have coordinated the plan with everyone who has wished to provide their input. I can tell you additionally that there are many times a divide between what a country or an organization says publicly and what they say and how they act privately.
So what are you saying about that? You're saying that Jordan is publicly saying that it's supporting the Palestinians, but privately it's telling the Israeli leaders it's with Israel?
I'm not going to go ahead and talk about any specific country or organization, but what I am telling you is that definitely there are actors within the international community who are saying one thing publicly and privately they're saying something completely different.
All right, and then on to another matter entirely. The High Court, we know, has almost unanimously thrown out a law that's been frozen, in fact, since 2017. That would allow the state to expropriate private Palestinian land where thousands of settler homes have been built. They were saying that the law was unconstitutional and that it violates the property rights of and equality of Palestinians. But then the one vote in favour in court argued that while it does violate Palestinian property rights, the court could have at least asked the Knesset to limit its scope. So what's your take?
Well, the Supreme Court has 15 justices, and this case was heard by the 9 justices that were appointed before Ayelet Shaked's tenure as Justice Minister. So the 8-1 ruling was one that could be expected. I think it's unfortunate they chose to choose specifically 9 and specifically go by seniority and leave the other 6 out of it, because I would imagine if there was a different composition, we would have probably seen a different result in terms of the vote. That being said, about the actual situation here, it was the Israeli Supreme Court decision to repeal this regulation outpost law, and this really creates the first test of this unity government, because it's quite obvious that the right and center-left aspects within this government do not see this issue the same way.
All right.
The Supreme Court intervention in the Knesset Speaker incident established this government. The Supreme Court intervention this time might even have the potential to topple it.
Jeremy Sultan, thank you so much for that insight and for being with us.
Thank you.
A new American immigrant to Israel on a flight with dozens of others moving to the Holy Land has tested positive for coronavirus. The woman arrived as part of a group of 51 other North Americans making Aliyah Tuesday. An immigration aid group, Nefesh B'Nefesh, saying the woman and her daughter had tested positive for antibodies before the flight, but decided to take a second test to see if, in fact, they were still carriers. Well, the private lab in the United States passing on the results after she arrived at her new home here in Israel, saying she tested positive, but her daughter didn't. Now, all passengers are in quarantine anyway, but some in the group have told Israeli media they're a little bit spooked. And that's as Israel moves to clamp down on restrictions, as Nittany Manson reports.
It's time to face the music. Security teams enforcing coronavirus restrictions closing this Tel Aviv street performance down, just as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu orders top government officials to step up enforcement of social distancing rules. As a new coronavirus outbreak gains steam across Israel, Health Minister Yuli Edelstein saying to prevent a second nationwide lockdown, social distancing rules should be as strict as the enforcement of traffic laws.
מי שהולך בלי מסכה, לא שומר מרחק, לא שומר על היגיינה בסיסית, משל היה נוסע כ-160 קמ"ש בשטח עירוני.
The number of active cases that had dipped below 2,000 last month has since surged beyond 2,700. After another fatality overnight, death toll now sits at 299, with close to 150 new infections in 24 hours. Regardless, the Shin Bet cell phone and credit card tracking program has come to an end after a 3-month mission to follow the movement of coronavirus cases. And despite infection cases rising, it's not stopping Americans from making Aliyah, the immigration to Israel under the right of return. More than 50 new immigrants from the U.S. landing in the Holy Land Tuesday and will now enter into 2 weeks quarantine. This as for the second time ever, Etihad Airlines flight has landed in Israel from Abu Dhabi, carrying another shipment of medical supplies to help Palestinians cope with coronavirus. The Foreign Ministry helped to coordinate the flight, and the aid will be transferred by the United Nations to Gaza and the West Bank.
And for a deeper insight into what this ping-ponging of restrictions is having on the Israeli economy, I'm joined in studio by consumer behaviour expert Vili Abraham. Vili, great to have you with us in studio.
Thank
the first time since coronavirus we've been speaking to you on Skype.
It's great to be here.
So talk us through what kind of projections we're seeing in the OECD around the Israeli economy.
Okay, so there are two scenarios. So first of all, if we're looking at the consequences, this is the worst health and economic crisis since World War II, and there are two scenarios. So if there's no second wave of infections, then global GDP is expected to shrink by 6% and Israeli's GDP by 6.2%, which is very, very significant. However, if there is a second wave, then global GDP is expected to shrink by 7.6% and Israeli's economy by 8.3%. And that's huge.
Right.
That's really, really huge.
It is huge, but give us a bit of context as to where that puts Israel in relation to perhaps other countries.
Well, in relation to other countries, I think that we were more or less on average as far as the impact is concerned. And if you look at the report by OECD, what they're saying is, and I think this is correct, what we need is we need to retrain workers. If you look at most of the people who have lost their jobs, those are people who are not able to work from home because they didn't have the skills to work from home. So we're talking usually about people who are unskilled or very young, and that's why we need to retrain the population. And by the way, the Israeli government has allotted 200 million shekels for that purpose.
Okay.
So that's great news.
It is great news, but there is also the concern that perhaps, now with talks of this second wave, that businesses, small businesses, bars and restaurants could be forced to close down once again. How is Israel preparing for something like that? Is Israel preparing for something like that?
Well, according to reports, I don't see where, that there's more money for this because the Israeli government has spent billions of shekels on this. And I really hope it doesn't happen because if you look at what happened after the first wave, most restaurants are in really deep, deep crisis. Many of them have closed. More, unfortunately, will close later on. And if there's another lockdown, that would be very, very bad.
Certainly, and we know that almost the face of the Israeli economic crisis has been its national carrier, El Al, but there has been an agreement reached with the Israeli government to help the airline. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so if you look at El Al, so El Al's crisis has really started back in 2013 after the Open Skies agreement has opened. And the trouble was that it was not able to compete with low-cost airlines. Another thing is that it's not very efficient. That there's a need for restructuring. There are a lot of employees. By the way, 10% of employees earn 90% of the income in the company. So now it's in deep trouble, and there are 3 different scenarios. The first one is the nationalization, meaning that the Israeli government puts in money and gets a significant stake in the company.
Right, because it's 150 million shekels at this point in return for shares.
Yes, exactly. That's probably the most likely scenario. The other one, which is a little bit less likely, is for it to file for bankruptcy and then to reopen. The third one, which is really, really unlikely, is getting a loan from banks. In any case, whatever happens, it has to lay off workers because there are a lot of workers, and it has to restructure.
Right.
Otherwise, it won't be able to compete with low-cost airlines.
Well, it would be a real shame if it had to file for bankruptcy, so let's hope that they can find their feet again. Thanks, Billy.
Sure.
Well, moving on now, to mask or not to mask, that is the question. As we try to protect ourselves and others from contracting coronavirus, there's been worldwide debate over whether these face masks are actually helping or harming us. The Israeli Prime Minister, for his part, is calling for citizens to put their masks back on, and it seems to come at the same time that evidence of their effectiveness grows. The World Health Organization now changing its advice to encourage their use after a study on their effectiveness showed it cuts infection risk by 85%. And here in Israel, Professor Cyril Cohen from Tel Aviv's Bar-Ilan University is one of many local scientists saying, "I told you so." And Professor Cohen is here to tell us more. Great to have you with us, Professor.
Thank you very much. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you. So talk us through, there was this whole should we, shouldn't we, and now it seems that the World Health Organization is on board with the idea that they are effective. Tell us why.
So in short, we should. And the reason is that we're talking about a droplet infection. We have two modes of transmission of that kind of viruses, okay? You have the airborne viruses, like, for example, measles or chickenpox, which can stand in the air. But this particular virus, the coronavirus SARS-CoV-2, is a droplet transmission virus, meaning that in order to infect someone else, that virus get into droplets. Now, a mask can effectively prevent the transmission of droplets, and therefore that's why we encourage people to wear masks.
If you walk through one of the markets here in Tel Aviv called Sugar Caramel, you'll see all of these different masks with different logos. They look very fashionable. People are making them themselves. Do those help us? What are the best masks to be using?
So based on that analysis that was published in The Lancet, the best masks are actually respirators. We're talking about the KN95 mask, which are very, I would say, dense in terms of the fabric of these masks, and this can really prevent the transmission of droplets. Now, you have, on the other scale, you have the fabric mask, the regular fabric mask that you were just mentioning, and here we would like to have masks that, again, the way the fabric is, it should be very dense so that droplets can go in and out, okay, because we have to prevent transmission on both ways.
Right.
And it would be better if it's water repellent. And in the middle, I would say you have the surgical masks, the regular masks that people are using, which are very good.
But how far should we take this? Because you're talking about, you know, water droplets, which are coming out as we speak. So while I'm speaking, I might speak and then walk in another direction, and there's still water droplets in the air. So should we only be wearing these in public spaces, or even at home, or how does it work?
So first, because it's in droplets, because of gravity, it sinks down, so it's not a problem. Okay, after a few seconds, you know, whatever you expelled is on the floor. So no, really, we should wear them in closed environments for sure, because it was shown that, for example, between 95 and 99% of cases of infection occurred in places that were closed.
So even within families, even when you go home, you can't take your mask off at the end of the day?
No, you should, because at some point, you know, it's not only, you know, the way you are talking or interacting with people, it's also what you're touching. So there's no limit to that.
So talk us through that, because masks are just one way of protecting ourselves.
Exactly.
You know, what else do we need to be doing? No washing hands, etc. But
so we have three main, I would say, three main things that can prevent transmission. First is what we call masks, and we just discussed that. Second is hygiene, using alcohol gel, washing your hands, and it can prevent a lot of infection. And the third thing is, of course, physical distance. And it was shown in that study that, for example, within, you know, keeping a distance of 1.5 meters can lower the risk of transmission by 82%. So.
And are there other studies, because obviously most people look to the World Health Organization as the major authority, but are there other studies that are backing up the World Health Organization or telling us other things we should be doing?
Oh yeah, so definitely there was a big study that is a meta-analysis that actually relies on 172 studies that show that really it's very important to wear a mask and that can really cut down the number of infections.
Well, Professor, thank you so much for that insight,
No problem.
really.
Thank you.
Well, there you go. We know how to stay safe. So it's now been 3 weeks since Israel's unity government was sworn in. You all remember it was a moment Israelis were beginning to feel would never happen after a 500-day political deadlock. But now, in a new poll by Israeli TV network Channel 12, showing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's party would grow to 40 seats if fresh elections were held today. That would mean that together with his right-wing religious allies, Netanyahu could easily form a government with without Defence Minister Benny Gantz's Blue and White Party. Now, if you're moved by polls, you'll have your own reaction to these results, with the not-so-distant memory of Israel slogging through 3 inconclusive elections, which then led to Gantz splintering from his own party to form a government with Netanyahu. The poll also predicting that the Labour Party would be wiped out in such a move. Well, everyone loves a family reunion, and now Israel's Ethiopian community is calling on the government to help them have many more.
Scenes like this bringing smiles to the faces of one Ethiopian family just this week, reunited in Israel after 20 years. But the Falashmora community says it's not enough, pushing the Israeli government to help bring other Jewish families stuck in Gondar to the Holy Land. Around 7,500 Falashmora still live in Ethiopia, many waiting years or even decades to make the move. In one campaign, Ethiopian Israelis like IDF soldier Cheru Workin taking to social media to pressure Israel with heartbreaking stories of families divided. Others calling attention to how the Falashmora seem to only come up during campaign season, just to be forgotten again when annual budgets are set.
And briefly now, Prime Minister Netanyahu has hired a new strategic and communications consultant. The Likud party announcing journalist Aaron Klein from right-wing publication Breitbart will now move to work for the Likud full-time. The Philadelphia native has been living in Jerusalem for several years. Now, Klein will not replace the PM's spokesperson Shir Cohen, and the post of international media spokesperson, well, it's still open if you want to apply. Now, you might remember this, that controversial commercial in which Israeli supermodel Bar Rafaeli was slammed for wearing a Muslim head covering. Well, you might have seen her in a burqa, but you won't be seeing her in that orange prison jumpsuit after she and her mother signed a plea bargain with prosecutors to settle tax evasion charges. But here's the clincher. Bar won't be seen behind bars. See what I did there? Her mother will go to jail instead. Tzipi Rafaeli will serve 16 months behind bars, while Bar will have to perform 9 months of community service. Prosecutors say the 34-year-old model and her mother hid tens of millions of shekels in earnings from tax authorities. The pair will also have to pay more than $700,000 in fines. Now, this is a story about giving credit where credit is due. And according to Israeli conservationists, one local bird is being cheated out of its holy status, while all at once being at risk of going extinct. Nittany Manson has more.
It's recognition worth fighting for. The griffin vulture is being grossly denied its biblical fame by being mixed up with the eagle. And it's not just that. These notably smelly creatures are also endangered. But in Israel, a network of conservationists are giving the fuzzy bird a new lease on life in a land whose ancient prophets saw in its soaring flight a metaphor for religious exaltation. Igal Miller, who works to conserve endangered raptors, says Israel's griffin vulture population has fallen to around 180 in the world after being hit by accidental poisoning and urbanization. So now Israel's Nature and Parks Authority are rearing the chicks in captivity.
פה אנחנו התחלנו עם גרעין רבייה שלנו מקומי, שעוד היה לנו מספיק, ומגדלים את הגוזלים, מאקלימים אותם, מרגילים אותם, ואחרי כמה שנים משחררים אותם לטבע.
And back to the namesake, which in Hebrew is nesher, the bird has often been mislabeled in scriptures, notably in the King James Version of the English Bible, which describes God as bearing the Israelites on eagle's wings rather than vulture's wings. And according to Israel's Biblical Museum of Natural History, many people still feel as uncomfortable as those 17th century translators did in identifying a vulture with the nobility it sees in the scriptures.
Oh, well, they say never judge a book by its cover. Let's take a look at the weather forecast now. Sunny skies wherever you look all across Israel. In the metro hub of Tel Aviv, though, a low tonight of 68 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 20 degrees Celsius. And tomorrow, a beautiful day with a high of 81 degrees Fahrenheit or 27 degrees Celsius. And now, before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel.
يلا يا مجنون 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 يلا مجنون
That is absolutely beautiful. We're seeing a Palestinian kid singing with Israeli soldiers, and it looks like they're having a great time. That's a beautiful image there. All right, well, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.44 shekels to the American dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV pages. I'm Tracy Alexander, and thank you so much for watching.